for the committee, and I appreciate my colleagues discussing at length the role of the special drawing rights issues that you and I have talked about several times, but I think it does merit noting that the $17.5 billion in equivalent of SDRs that were issued last summer by the IMF to Russia boosted their total SDR balance to 72%, meaning that was the largest portion of their SDRs are from last year's allocation. And it's really their gold and their SDRs that, in my view, are still subject to the ability to avoid sanctions. I think it's a real risk, and that's why I'm also glad that Chair Waters, we marked up H.R. 6899 that encourages you as our Treasury Secretary to make sure that the U.S. works very hard to make sure that Russia and Belarus cannot in any way exchange their SDRs. So thank you for that work. So I want to follow up, though, on our conversation we had last summer. You made some commitments to the committee and to the public about the enhanced rules that the IMF would do about that SDR issuance. You told us in March last year, we're working with the IMF to craft rules that will make transparency, make it difficult to exchange. Did the IMF release those rules?
So the IMF has given countries guidelines about appropriate use of SDRs, and there is a disclosure framework so that we can monitor how they are being used. I don't quite know where you can access those, but I know that they have been produced.
I think it'd be useful for the committee to have that access to those guidelines. And do you know if any SDRs were exchanged since they were issued for payment in any form of debt?
So I can't give you a detailed rundown, but I can tell you that the United States...
Now, I know the United States isn't doing it. This isn't the question. This is in your capacity of overseeing our role as the largest shareholders in the IMF. I know that the U.S. is in good standing here. But one of the concerns last year was you couldn't obtain that commitment from anybody, and we didn't ask anybody to commit to it in advance of it being issued. So we have not seen that guidance. We don't know what those transactions have taken place, if any, over the past year. So I think that would be very helpful.
We'll try to work with you on that.
Thank you very much. And this is all why I introduced H.R. 1568, the Special Drawing Rights Oversight Act, which would do the following. Would require congressional approval for all allocations of SDRs equal to 25% of the U.S. quota, rather than the 100% under current law. Limit unilateral allocations to once every 10 years rather than every 5 years, and requiring congressional consultations 180 days before consenting to an allocation rather than 90. We don't need to reiterate how much we've, I think, demonstrated that last year's SDR issue across the board to all members of the IMF was a mistake, as noted by Ranking Member McHenry. On the subject of FinCEN, do you believe that FinCEN should have the nationwide authority to review any transaction of any amount on any subject out in the financial space over $10,000? In other words, expand the geographic targeting that they do to a nationwide audience. Do you think that's appropriate?
So I'm not sure. I need to get back to you on that. I know that FinCEN has some concerns with geographic coverage because of the prevalence of internet transactions, and would like to see some changes.
I'd like to hear your personal view on that, because with no limitations, that would mean every transaction over $10,000 would be subject to review by a FinCEN staff and added to a database. That seems unusual to me and perhaps not prudent, so I'd like your personal view on that. The last subject I wanted to raise with you is we've all expressed some concerns, including the chairwoman, about the performance of our managing director at the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva. And I have concerns about her qualifications. Do you share those concerns? Do you have all the faith in the world in her leadership at the IMF?
Believe that she's done a good job of guiding the IMF. We have been very supportive of the work that the World Bank did to look into the World Bank's Doing Business report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to send to our Oversight Committee, Madam Chair, a letter requesting an investigation to the Director of the IMF. Thank you.
Well, without objection, such is the order. Thank you. We will now hear from the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Secretary, good to see you.
Thank you.